That's 5:30 by most watches, so I'll go ahead and call this February 22nd, 2018 meeting of the Carson City Library Board of Trustees to order. And we will commence with the roll call.
Chairperson Hayes.
Present.
Vice Chair Long.
Present.
Trustee Livrati.
Present.
Trustee Patton.
Present.
Trustee Solinger.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 2, public comment. If any members of the public wish to address the board, now would be the time. Seeing none forthcoming, we'll move on to item 3, approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review the meeting minutes? And are there any addendums, changes, anything like that? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay.
I'll second.
All right. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Moving on to item 4, the Friends of the Carson City Library report.
It is, the Friends Library report, our Friends report is in your packet. I don't really have anything to add to that, except that for the Friends, the open meeting law training has now taken place, and now we know exactly where we stand, and templates for all kinds of agendas are in the process of being made. So we should be quite compliant from here on out.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on to item 5, the Library Board of Trustees business, starting with 5A, discussion and possible action on internal communication consulting project report from What Works Coaching.
Okay, so I hope you all had an opportunity to read it. This does not require any action. This is being provided to you as part of the plan that we took as library leadership with the management team to move forward and try to fix some of those and address some of the communication issues that have been brought up by staff in the past. And from what the report provides, it does appear that our communication is progressing in a positive way. It is slow going at times, but we are all working on those pieces. Are there any questions?
How often are you getting together and working on these, or is it just individual work being done?
So the different teams had different SMART goals that they were setting out to complete. Some of those teams have completed those SMART goals. Some of them are still in the process of that. For instance, Amy's group's SMART goal was essentially moving the library, and we are done moving the library. We're can't think of the word. We're close enough that we were grand open on Friday, so what the public sees is the done side of the library. So it just depends on that. We do have a contract in process right now for all of our managers to receive coaching as they feel that they need it for themselves with What Works Coaching. So we do have that in the books and coming up, so that I hope all of the managers, including myself, will take advantage of that as well.
I have a question. In Appendix D, there's post-engagement survey questions, and there's a spectrum of no improvement to great improvement. Are those for private, personal use of the individual employee? Is that something that was discussed at the seminar?
So those post-survey results are discussed in the report. That was provided to Diane Dyhansen, and that's where I was able to get that it is improving. So I can pull that up here to pull up the specific results.
I'll read them later, thank you.
I can pull it up. We got some time.
I read them once.
Okay.
It was a week ago.
Okay. But that's where I pulled that we are seeing improvement based on what staff have reported back.
Right, if I remember my reading of the report about half an hour ago, it looked like between 65 and 75% of staff were indicating improvement, I don't have the micro data for that, of course, but
Yeah.
that was in the conclusion.
Yeah, so what it says here that I see, and it was anonymously done by staff, submitted to Diane. So we don't even have those details. But the greatest area of improvement was in respectful communication from leadership and direct supervisors at a 90% average improvement. And that is on page 11 of the report, just for your future reference.
Is there any further discussion on this action item? Okay, seeing none, we can move on to item 5B, ranking the library capital improvement projects priority for city budget FY 19 to 23.
Okay, Sina Lloyd, for the record. I don't know if you need that tomorrow, but there you go. So the city jumped the gun a little bit, though we were supposed to go review it this week. We did go into our little battle royale. We did not fight, but with all the department heads to discuss the rankings of CIP. And we did that this morning. So, some of these things I still want you guys to rank because we do have them out for a 5-year plan. And so looking at where they should go in that 5-year plan, and even if we can't receive city funding for some of these, looking at alternative funding sources to fund some of these projects. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a breakdown from what happened this morning so you guys have an idea as to where the city sits and exactly how much money there is for capital and exactly how much was requested for capital. So the requests for capital this year from all of the departments from the general capital fund, which there is special money for like the sewer system and those kinds of things. So that general amount, the request was $12 million. The available funding was $3 million. $2.2 million of those dollars is part of the ERP system, or essentially the IT system that runs all of the city's bank accounts, all of the assessor information, all of the treasurer information, all of the personnel, all of the payroll, everything. That was $2.2 million because the current vendor no longer supports the system, and we are essentially running on borrowed time in that area because we have a system that was put into place in 1990 in the city. So if you take that away, we have $1.3 million to put amongst $10 million worth of requests from all of the departments. What our requests for this fiscal year were, and they are listed on here as well, was a library vehicle. We do have our current library vehicle, which is our mobile makerspace, and then we use a motor pool vehicle for our runs on Tuesdays out to Churchill County. So that vehicle was on there. That's $28,000. The library self-checks were on there. That's $36,000. And then our minor HVAC was on there, and that's about $8,000. So Fleet came in, and Fleet talked to, because last year Fleet really wanted us to replace our vehicle. And I gave that up so we could receive other funding for capital that produced what we have right now in the library, the floors and the paint. So this year, Fleet came in, and knowing the amount of funding we had available, prioritized their vehicles that cost the most for them to fix as what they would like to see funded. Our vehicle was not on that list because our vehicle, especially now that it's a mobile makerspace, is not driving very many miles every year, and so it's less of an issue than it has been in the past. So that's fine with us. I mean, to have to convert a new vehicle into the mobile makerspace would take some funding, due to the wrap that we have on the current vehicle, and our current mobile makerspace is still running and is still functioning. So that was not suggested for funding this year. The library self-checks, seeing that our current self-checks are working, and we can look at possible other sources of funding this project. We went ahead and took that off the table due to some of the other requests. And then our HVAC minor, that $8,009, that actually was put forward in the request for funding. This is the Creative Learning Office, and the Creative Learning Office has HVAC, and it's not hooked to anything. And the Amoresco, which is what replaced our LED, the lights in the library with LED, and did some HVAC things in the library, apparently they are not covering that. And so so that's why we put this request in, because the average temperature in the morning when staff are getting to work is about 55 degrees, which is a little bit cold. It is winter, but it does get hot in the summer as well. And because of the Amoresco study and what they did, the savings from the energy savings is going to actually pay for the contract. And so we are no longer allowed to use space heaters or fans that are larger than 12 inches in diameter. And so we are going to have to do this for that office to be livable for those staff and to be able to be in that space. And so the city manager did put that through for approval. So with that being said, we do have, we still have a library vehicle. We have our self-checks. The roofing is on the city's facilities CIP for 2021. And then we have an auto sorter. Our auto sorter is coming up to life of the product, and we're not going to be able to continue to use that too far into the future with repair costs and such. Yes.
What's the ducting? Is that related to the HVAC?
Yeah, that's just this where it says CIP HVAC minor, that's the actual CIP form. And then we have the diagram and then the quote for what that would cost from the company.
So is that 2 projects or 1 project?
It's one project.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say.
This is Diane Baker for the record. It's one project, but there would be 2 different vendors, one to do the connect the ducting and put everything in place, and then there would be another to tie into the city's electronic heating system. So, but one project, 2 vendors.
And then the last item we have is the 24-hour library, and this is something that would be potentially installed in an underserved location in our community, and people would be able to access it 24/7 and check out books from it, and also put books on hold that would be placed in there, and then you use your library card to retrieve those holds. It's similar to the book robot that we had over at the Boys and Girls Club, but instead of being a robot, because there are many, many different issues with it being a robot, as we learned, it will actually, it's a conveyor belt system that essentially drops books for you. So what we're looking for is a ranking of those items that in your minds are a priority. We do have for each of the CIP, we have the year in which it would take place. So right now we have the 24-hour library in year 2021. 21, 22. I'm going to just write these down real quick so we can go over them. So what we have is the vehicle in this current year, but it was not selected to go forward for funding. The self-check this current year not selected to go forward for funding. The roof in 2021, and that is the main library roof, and I believe it's about $280,000 to do it the way that Facilities currently is wanting to do that. And then the 24-hour library in 21-22. Oh, and then the auto sorter in 2021. So, are there any suggestions? Or is there anything that is not on this list that you feel would be a capital investment, which is a single-time occasional cost that should be on this list?
Are you talking about additions to this list?
Yeah, if you have any additions. What we do not have on this list is the bathrooms, and that is because the vendor was not able to provide us a quote. I think Diane can tell you why.
Yeah, Diane Baker for the record. We had contacted vendors that Facilities had directed us to, and in working with them and trying to get the scope of the project, it turned out that the scope of the project was bigger than the contractor is allowed to do in the city, and then did not want to bid it because they would not be able to, or quote it because they wouldn't be able to bid on it. And then we ran into some other time issues, and so we got some information, but not enough to put the full package forward for CIP. So we will be rolling forward on that, but in the time frame, we had some issues with the contractor that we were directed to.
So is that to say that it's enough work that you have to hire a general contractor and then they'll subcontract the plumbing, or?
That's correct. That's what he was suggesting, that it would have to be bumped up to a general contractor, and it was a higher dollar amount.
Did we get a ballpark on that?
No, just that it would be over 50, and that was as much as that particular contractor was willing to say.
Is it because they need to be ADA capable?
No, in 1992, they were actually refurbished to be ADA compliant. It's right now, the finish isn't great. They were redone in 1992, but really the issue is actually improper plumbing. Like it would need to be dug out through the parking lot to the street, and pipes relayed at the correct angle and everything, because that's actually the issue. We have a lot of backup that happens in the men's restroom, and we have, I'd say, almost daily complaints about the smell in the men's restroom because of that.
Okay, so to me, unless you fix the infrastructure, the other, and pardon me for using this word, gadgets are lower on the priority list. I realize the library can't function without sorters and computers and all that, but if the roof's leaking, that's not good for new equipment either.
Absolutely. Last year we had a leak that was near the sorter, but that was not due to faulty roofing. That was due to sealing sealing properly the holes that were in the roof from the HVAC system. So they believe they have had that fixed. Now, we haven't had a strong winter, but we have not seen any leaks so far this winter.
Yeah. The year that these were chosen for the budget, were those based on the expected life expectancy of these gadgets for now?
For the gadget, sure. The roof is facilities and the asset management plan. That is when that was selected for. We did not make that selection.
Okay, thank you.
Would it be appropriate to, I realize that we don't have a ballpark figure or anything like that, but would it be appropriate to rank the bathroom remodel and, bring it probably up to code?
Absolutely.
Would it be appropriate to rank that in this action item?
I think absolutely.
Okay.
So we need to triage the order of the projects.
Yeah, and I mean, we can put them in the years, and I mean, it's what we're looking at for the future for CIP, just to give you an idea, and we're going to talk a little bit about supplemental requests in the next item, even though we only received our request or our information about our budget for next year yesterday. But we're looking at approximately $3 million worth of capital requests will be funded each year total. That includes fleet services, which could take it all. And then about $500,000 in supplemental requests. Supplemental requests would include positions. Capital is going to be that one-time occasional expense, generally over $15,000.
Well, since you brought that up, can you address positions?
In the next item.
Thank you.
So based on what I've heard and what I think I agree with, the highest priority, and it sounds like it's already being put forth for this budget year, would be the HVAC, correct?
Correct.
So I think that, would you all agree that that's probably priority number one for this ranking list that we're building?
Right.
And then from there, I would assume that it'd either be the roofing or the bathroom for number two.
I don't think they have any choice about the roofing.
Right, and I think that we know when that's happening.
Right.
But I think that we need, it's 2 or 3.
Right.
Yeah. So.
So since we know when the roof's getting done, do we already know we have the money for that? For sure.
No.
That's what I thought.
I mean, I can tell you that the Board of Supervisors have made it a priority to address asset management issues, which would be the roof on their building, because the library doesn't own the building, the city owns the building. But that's going to go to the board every year.
And if we don't have any leaks in this year or the next year, we'll slip further down the, because it's not a...
I mean, but asset management is a priority, and
Right.
maintaining their buildings is something that the
should
Board of
be,
Supervisors want them to do.
Right.
The reason that all of the buildings in the city are at the level that they are is because maintenance has been averted.
Right.
So we all know what that does.
Exactly.
The roof at the Aquatic Center was a good example of this. It actually, when they went to redo the roof this year, they found rot. And so it was significantly more expensive than they thought it was going to be. So I think that they do understand, and I think Facilities and Public Works is fighting to be able to get the funding to do that.
I actually think that the restrooms should go first. I think it's more of a health issue than the heating. I understand that it's cold, and I understand there's things you can do with it, but I think that backing up the sewers into the men's room and the other restroom, I think that's more of a health issue and you would find yourself on the front page more for that than you would, oh, it's kind of hot or it's kind of cold in the library.
Well, the HVAC is something that they've put forward this year for funding. That's $8,000.
Yeah, but you
in
said for us
staff.
to rank them, so I would say.
Oh, okay.
that we would
I'm just
rank
saying in
them as-
staff space.
Tell them that our ranking is the restrooms number one and
That actually makes sense to me as well.
I agree, John. Considering the demographic,
Hit it again.
the clientele that we have. Considering the clientele and the demographic that comes into the library, the more pristine, the better, the bathrooms.
I do also want to say, though, that hot or cold, 55 degrees is pretty cold for a staff space, and this is library staff. This is not public
No, but
space.
but the perception is, if you put yourself before the public, and it comes out that way when you go to rank them and they come to see the document that you did it that way, you're not going to survive that onslaught. It's better to put up something
That's fine.
that looks like you're...
I'm going to defend my staff here.
I would defend them too. I mean, I'll go buy them coats if that's what it comes to.
As someone who's been in the back room, I know how cold it is back there, but I also know the public doesn't know how cold it is back
It's
there,
actually
and they don't care.
that's not that back room. It's the creative learning staff's back room behind the digitorium. So think about 10 to 12 degrees colder than in the back room, the back staff room. That's what we're talking about.
Again, don't shoot the messenger, just expressing an opinion.
I think I'd want to know like how you guys feel about, like the sorter and the 24-hour library, like your opinion on that, because I think you guys know that better than we do.
Okay, so the sorter, I would prioritize over the 24-hour library. Without a sorter, it's not that the library can't just run, but we actually lost 3 positions in the recession, and the idea was that the sorter would be able to take place of those positions, so we did not have to touch every single book as it came back in to be checked in. And so if we lose a sorter, you will have no programs in the library. I mean, that's what we're looking at, is we would have to put staff back on desk to be checking in those items. So, I mean, that's what that would equate to. Or we would need more staff, which is not something that the Board of Supervisors is that inclined to give.
So its expected lifespan at this point is how long?
So when we requested that, so that is 2021, it will be 11 years old.
And how long in the past year or 2 years has it needed repair? How many times?
So it needs repair right now. We're going to have them coming out to do that. It's still running, but we pay about $20,000 a year to maintain the equipment that we have that is EnvisionWare equipment, and the main piece of that is the sorter.
What else does that cover, please, besides the sorter?
It covers us needing to call if there's an issue with the public computers, because that's what we used for patrons to log on to public computers for our printing. The self-checks. Yeah, it's all the check-in, check-out pieces. It's all the automation that we have in the library.
So what about like the self-check service versus like the 24-hour library and the vehicle? Like what?
So the self-checks are, right now what we just have computers with RFID pads connected to them. These self-check systems are probably more expensive than we could put together a computer with an RFID. So, I mean, we could, if we needed to, we could get by with them cheaper. Like the auto sorter, I would rank above that. Again, because of the time commitment that it would end up taking and the detriment to library services that would have. The vehicle, I think that we are okay with not having an extra city vehicle. I mean, that would also be about $5,000 a year in vehicle VEUs or vehicle equipment usage that we would also have to pay to maintain that vehicle. So that's a piece of that as well. I mean, I would say out of the technology and like the vehicle here, I would say that the auto sorter is the most important out of those. And then follow it up with the self-checks and the car, probably around the same. And then the 24-hour library. The 24-hour library, we have a community where not everyone can get to the library. We have a lot of people who have library cards, but a 24-hour library, say in the south of town or east over by Empire Elementary School. It could be useful for the community to be able to have access to the library in that way. That's not to say that we can't find alternative funding for that too, or one of the things, it's in the gift catalog, the 24-hour library for the Friends. So I mean that there is potential that we could find other funding for that, but I do think that it's necessary for the community to see the needs of the library, and if we don't have them on our CIP reports, then how are they going to really know what those are?
I agree with that. I'm wondering if there's any grant money available for anything that's on this list for this fiscal year coming up.
Diane Baker for the record. For immediately for the next fiscal year, there's not an obvious source at the moment. I will look to see what is available. The LSTA program, and that'll be part of my report later, but the LSTA program through the State Library and Archives, we've already put in a different proposal for the next federal fiscal year. But it can be considered, as long as there's federal funding, we can look for it future. But we are looking in the face of a potential of the federal funding not being available due to a request on the federal level to close that particular institute.
If that funding does stay around and IMLS does stay funded, we would be looking at as earliest as a 1920 project. 2019, 2020 project.
That's for the 24-hour library?
To me, I thought that said 21.
Or for the...
That would be for the next LSTA Library Services Technology Act funding that we could apply
okay.
for. Jeremy just signed our current grant, so.
On the auto sorter, which is kind of like updating or sort of replacing, do they treat that the same way on the LSAT grants as they do computers, that they won't replace what you already have? Or
generally speaking, yeah. I mean, we did receive it. So the sorter, the first part of the sorter came in on LSTA, and then I think it was 2 years later or a year later, we did the second part of the sorter. But it would be replacing it. It wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, here's the example. It's still running on Windows XP. And the amount to change that is ridiculous. It's about $20,000. It's not cheaper. It's $80,000 more to get a new one. But I mean, that's a significant amount of money to just change it so that the operating system is supported.
So just as a check-in with the other board members, for the list that we're building, I've got the first three lined out as priority number 1 being the bathrooms, number 2 being HVAC, number 3 being the roof. It sounds to me from the discussion that I'm hearing that priority number 4 is probably the auto sorter being replaced. Would everybody agree with that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and write that down for the list.
So as far as need for the library, I think the next one would probably be the self-check service. Unless you guys think the 24-hour library is...
I think it would be self-check. I think that would be the most public and citizen-friendly of that versus the vehicle.
Hey, I'm okay with the bathroom. The rest of it, they can fight out.
And then I think the 24-hour library and then the vehicle. That's my suggestion.
I think that's reasonable.
So the years you put for the self-check being 2018 and the auto sorter 2020 is when they're probably going to die? Is that what you're telling me? Because we're putting them in a different priority order than that.
That's fine. That's fine. The self-check we put in this year, but they did not put it forward for funding. We pulled that off of, the 7 million that didn't, it was part of the 7 million that isn't going forward to the Board of Supervisors. So we can put it anywhere we need to.
I get that, but what I'm saying, is it sicker than the auto sorter? Is that why you put it sooner?
No. I mean, it's we're using old public computers for them. I mean, at any point they could die, we can replace them with another old computer. And, we can buy an RFID pad. That's not that piece. It was more likely that we would have funded a smaller project than a larger project.
Because to me, these years look like you've already triaged them and we're doing them in a different order.
We had to because CIP was due to finance a week and a half ago. So we had to put something forward to them now, but we can change it at any point in time. We just every year have to give them a 5-year plan of what our capital looks like.
Okay, thank you.
So when you change it, you'll put it forward as the trustee recommendations?
Correct, and I'll attach the minutes from this meeting.
So I believe that we have the priority ranking for the 7 items, the 6 that were presented and the 7th that was brought up to us. That being the bathrooms, then the HVAC, then the roof, then the sorter, then the self-check update, the 24-hour library, and then the vehicle. Is that what everybody is in agreement with?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. In that case, I would entertain a motion.
I will make a motion that we prioritize all of these things in the following order. There's the bathroom first, the HVAC second, the roof third, the auto sorter fourth, self-check fifth, 24-hour library sixth, and the vehicle seventh.
I second.
Okay. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. And with that, we can move on to item 5C, the general budget supplemental request priorities.
Okay, so if you open the average staff expenses, what you'll see, and Diane has it up here, it is a little hard to read on the screen. But what I did, because I knew we were going to be talking about this, and the supplementals essentially in the city are anything you're requesting over your base budget, and our base budget year after year is the same unless we've gotten a supplemental approval from the year before, and then that changes to become our base budget. So we have gotten supplemental requests in the past. Some of those, it ranges from more money in our hourly salary to funding moved from redevelopment to the library for our business databases. That's what we've traditionally gotten supplementals for. And then last year we did get a CIP of funding to replace 5 of our public computers. This year they've asked us to, if we're going to do that, to put it in as a supplemental request. So that would go into this process rather than a CIP request, because it will be a consistent ask. The plan with that and how we've made the argument work in the past is if we can put in enough in our supplemental, so that's like $4,000, it's about $5,000 for 5 computers. If we can put that in this year and we can essentially have that each year, then we can use Friends funding to match that. as I like write all over myself with a pen, but use Friends funding to match that. So then we can have 10 new public computers a year, and then we can be on an actual replacement schedule to replace the computers that we do have. So that's kind of part of that. So that would be a supplemental we would be asking for this year. And we don't have a lot of time. These are due March 9th to finance. That's, again, why we're talking about it now before you guys even see our supplemental explanations and everything written out, because it's going to be due before we can present that to you. So what I have here is an overview of employer paid retirement plan versus employer paid retirement plan. It changes a employee's hourly wage. That is why you see two different scales on here. So what you're seeing for a library assistant, a senior library assistant, a librarian, and then under employer paid, we also have a manager. Managers can only get employer paid retirement. They don't have an option for another. So this gives you, under the total expense, that gives you the expense of the staff person's salary plus their benefits. And this is an average amount. It's hard to calculate this outside of calculating it for a specific staff person, because we receive this in the budget. So that's why you're seeing the rates at which they are, and all the expenses calculated like they are. So these are, at some point in time, one of our employees' actual salary and benefits that you're seeing, so that you can get an idea of what the cost of an employee is. And these positions are these ones that you have in here are showing only as self-insured if the family is insured, and that's a selection they make. The city pays an additional $10,000 a year approximately for that. So this is the low number of what it could cost, not the high number of what it could cost. So taking that into consideration, if Diane, if you could open the original budget. So we're working off this current year's original budget. The reason for that is we didn't have the numbers from finance for the coming year of what it's looking like. I briefly looked at them and they look exactly the same, so which is normal, because until we actually get a supplemental, it won't change. So what you're seeing here is what our line items are. And you're going to see at the top, we have regular salaries, we have hourly salaries, and we have temporary staffing. Regular salaries are all of our full-time employees plus their benefits. And then the hourly salary is our hourly employees, and our temporary staffing is our marathon employees. And our marathon employees are hourly employees, just not employed through the city.
Right.
And janitorial, which are marathon employees that are just not employed through the actual city. So to keep this in mind, I mean, we can move, generally speaking, any money from a line item to another line item. We have to go through IFC, but that is something we can do. We also, to ensure that we keep our ability to apply for LSTA funding through the state library, we also have to at least meet 10% of our operating expense, or of our budget, be for books and periodicals and publications. So that's that 0645 line item. So just kind of keep that in mind. We're a little bit above what 10% would be right now, but we wouldn't be able to move much out of there to not be able to maintain that 10%.
So are you looking for direction from us as to whether or not we should be on the employee-employer paid retirement versus the employer-paid retirement?
I'm looking for direction from you guys about what supplementals you want us to be submitting to the Board of Supervisors and what supplementals that you guys want to help defend to the Board of Supervisors. If we go for a position, I need at least 3 board members at those budget meetings and at the budget hearing defending why we need that position. It's going to be a lot to ask for a position and get it. I think if we do ask for a position, we probably will not get any other supplementals that we request. If we don't go for a position, then we can ask for other supplementals such as the computers. We also want to look at our operating budget because our operating budget has not increased in the last at least 5 years, but our printing has increased and we do take in money for printing. And so we would like to see that reflected in our operating budget. And really anything else that we would want to add to anything in this budget, we would probably not be able to get or go. I mean, we could go for it, but I don't think we'd be able to get it if we were asking for a position. And while you guys are looking at that and contemplating, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the calendar and let you guys know when the budget meetings are so that you guys can see if you're going to be available. So the budget open house is going to be March 26th, and that is going to be a lunchtime. There's going to be a lunchtime open house, and then there'll be an evening open house, and that's where the public can come in and talk to the different departments, talk to them about what they're requesting, and then the public can actually rank those requests, and they do listen. That's how we got our floors done.
Right.
Okay, and then the Board of Supervisor presentation is going to be on April 5th, and that's during the supervisor meeting, and I don't know when on that day that it's going to be, but it could very well be a lot of that day, a good portion of that.
Could you give me an idea? Because like you said, if we're going after a position, that's likely the only thing that we're going to accomplish, right? Because it's such a large expense. One of the proposed ideas is looking at money for a rotating computer fund so that we can start updating those. What other ideas could you give us for things like that, for the supplemental?
So I would say the rotating computer fund, we can always use money in hourly. That's our shelver base, and especially if in future items you choose to offer merit increases, is that what we're calling them, for part-time employees, that budget's going to need to go up, or we're going to have to offer less hours. That's something we've talked about before, so that would be something that would be needed to be included in there. If we increase any of our budget, and I think we would have about enough, but if we increased our budget, let's say we brought on a manager, or tried to request a manager position, we may have to also increase the book budget to be able to keep that 10%. And if they did not approve an increase in that budget, we would have to move it from somewhere else to increase that budget. And I mean somewhere else meaning in a different line item that's already there.
You'd have to do that in any event, right? Whatever supplemental, you'd have to.
We have a little bit of a cushion though there.
Yeah, so the way that I'm reading it is the current books and periodicals is $173,000. And our current total budget is $1.7 million. That means that we have a $30,000 cushion, approximately, that we can work within. Now, that's not going to that's not quite going to make up for a new position. So we would have to work within the budget for that. We'd have to move things, correct?
I'm not good at math, so this could be, isn't that, if it's 170?
I'm sorry, I went full
3,000?
economist.
No, but if it's 173,000, wouldn't it be 70,000?
Your budget is your budget is $1,702,000.
I'm sorry, I was looking at that backwards. I apologize.
He's right. You've got a little bit of a fudge.
If you're going to keep talking, you should put your mic on.
What? You've got a little bit of a fudge factor, but you're still going to have to move some money to cover what if it.
No, it's 70,000.
Yeah.
So we have
you have
70,000.
a 30,000 fudge. You've got to find 40.
70,000 fudge.
That's your supplemental.
It's not a fudge, but let's not call it a fudge.
That's your supplemental, right?
If anybody's
You've
listening.
got 30,000 already allocated in your book thing. You'd have to find 40,000.
So our budget's $1.7 million. We have 173,000 in our book budget, meaning it's about $70,000 that we have. Right? It's $3,000. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. $1,000. No, 1,000. Because it's 1.702.
1.702.
Right, but so the books and
Well, less than,
periodicals has
yes.
to be 10% of the total
Correct.
budget.
Yes, so we would have to add or move money into that to be able to make the 10%.
What?
Right.
Yeah. I see, okay. I see, yes, it's 30.
Your books and periodicals is saying that your budget is $1,730,000. That's what it's saying. Because you're putting 10% in, which is 173. Okay?
I got it. But yes, so we would we could put a supplemental in for that extra amount of money. If we're asking for a position, we're probably not going to get that other supplemental. Or if they see both of those, they might just not approve either because they don't want to have to put that much money into the budget. Or we'll have to move money from a different line item into that book budget to cover that. And we
Not
are
all of it.
no, but we are lean
Yeah, you are.
in all of our line items. So there's not
You're gonna rob Peter to
$40,000.
pay Paul if you end up doing something like that.
Yeah. I mean, we would have to be looking at essentially removing hourly employees. That's that amount, or professional services.
So did we get the 5,000 for computers last year?
Yes, but we got it in CIP, not in our
supplemental.
yes,
Okay,
consistent
so
budget.
It wouldn't automatically show up in this year's budget
Correct.
then. Okay. So we need to get it in there at least 1 year.
That's our current approximate.
Correct.
Okay.
That's our max budget.
Well, how much do you need to start the
Without increasing,
rotating computers, or start with the replacement computers? What would make you comfortable?
The computers that we purchased, all the computers we have essentially, some of them are a little bit older, but they were all purchased on the BTOP grant, which it makes them about 6 years old at this point, or almost 6 years old. And that is about the lifespan for a PC public computer. So the sooner we can get that going, the better. If not, we're going to have at some point, because even at that rate, we're going to be leaving some computers in service for 10 years.
Yes, but give me a figure what you,
It should have happened 3 years ago.
no, I want to know a number. You're asking for a supplemental. What's
Oh,
the dollar amount?
5,000.
That's
Because we would
sufficient?
be matching it with 5,000 from the Friends, and that would be $10,000. That would replace 10 computers a year. And then that would also, because we don't want
To replace them all.
to replace them all at the same time, or we're going to be in the same position.
yeah.
So we want to get to the point where we're replacing 10 each year, and that's just a constant thing that we're doing every year.
Okay, so you're asking for 5,000 for computers. You're asking for 5,000 for computers. Would you want to ask for anything? I mean, go little. I mean, you're not going to go for a person. It doesn't sound like you're asking to go for a new staff. So if you're not going to go for a new staff, ask for a couple of little things and tell me what
It's your
you'd rather
decision
get.
if we go for staff or not. It's not mine.
I don't hear you yelling for a new staff.
I
so I'm
would
saying no.
absolutely like new staff. Do I think that the Board of Supervisors will fund it? I don't know. Do I think that it's going to need all of your support? Absolutely, if it's going to be funded. Do our staff need more staff? Say it on record.
I think that most people would say, yes, they do want more staff.
Because we do have a heavy workload. Something that will come up in my report, Natalie did leave us. She went to Douglas County, and Kim did leave us before that. That was in November after our board meeting. And then Natalie in December, and then she was gone in January. Well, one of the comments we do get exit interviews was a heavy workload. I'm not going to say that it's not. We do a lot. It is reflected in what we're known for nationally at our library, and we're a little library. But I mean that does have an impact on staff.
Is this manager replacing one of those two people, or is it a different position manager?
I'm not suggesting that we hire a. I actually don't understand what you're asking.
Well, the word manager's been bandied about, and I'm at a loss for where we're putting a manager.
So we are replacing. We are hiring for. We've hired for Kim's position. I'll tell you this in my report. We are hiring for the manager position, which was Natalie's position. That is separate from the discussion we're having right now. The discussion we're having with this is an additional position, and I've given you all of the options and the cost for what those options look like.
And I think the reason that the manager has been talked about so much is because that's the highest cost position.
I knew that, but I also knew two people had left, so I didn't know if we were talking about the manager to replace one of those
positions would
two.
already be in our budget,
Yeah.
right?
Correct.
So do you need another full-time employee staff, or do you really need more hourly help? Which would be the most beneficial for you and the rest of the staff?
I'm actually going to go ahead and put Amy and Kathy on the spot and see what their opinions are, because I think that their opinions will matter in this answer.
Yeah, I think that hearing from the front line is the way to go.
Kathy Rush for the record. I, at this point, feel that having more hourly help that can be more flexible in terms of the hours they work and the days they work, and doing the boots on the ground kind of work that we need to run the library every day would be very beneficial.
I agree with Kathy that we are in need of hourly help right now. With the everyday running the things. That's kind of the people that kind of have to keep the building running, do all that kind of invisible work of keeping everything on the shelves and keeping everything moving and keeping everything clean. I do think we have enough work for more permanent staff to distribute if we are able to get to that point. I'm not sure that point is now, for the reasons that Sita has already pointed out. There's definitely enough work. The question is whether there's funding for it.
When we had that efficiency study, X number of years ago, the consensus was for the employee flow chart that it was top-heavy. So the whole point is to maintain it as bottom-heavy, I think, to paraphrase. And that's exactly what these two are saying, right?
I don't disagree. A library assistant wouldn't make it top-heavy, though. I mean, like, it's different work than a library clerk or a library shelver, but which are the two part-time positions that we have. But it's no less. That doesn't make it more top-heavy. I mean, it would be under one of the managers as a supervised position that way in a CCEA position. I do want to point out that the efficiency study did not have us reducing staff, but it did because managers reported that they were shelving items. That is part of why they felt that we needed to not have as many managers. I don't think what was reflected in that report, though, was that managers, I'd say consistently, work over 40 hours a week. And so if we're shelving for 2 or 3 hours, is, over our 40 hours a week, is that really a loss to the city? Or, I mean, if we have a CCA employee work over 40 hours a week, we have to pay them overtime. So, I mean, that's the difference between the manager and the CCEA, and I don't think that was completely reflected. Besides the response that the position, that we have, the workload was heavy, we also have in Diane Dyhansen's report a mention of staff mentioning a heavy workload, and at some point us probably wanting to look at our staffing and proceed with, I forget exactly how she phrased it, but essentially looking at if we need additional staffing. So that was something that was also brought up in that report.
Well, how about we put in $5,000 for the computers, and we ask for $30,000 for hourly wage?
That'll take us outside of the 10% for the LST grant. That's feasible. I'm doing a little bit of math real quick. Sina, from what I'm seeing, I'm paging ahead to grab a little bit of information. It looks like to me the average hourly rate for our part-time hourly in FY18 was, call it $11 an hour. Would that be ballpark?
I would say so. We are looking at, I think she left them as, there was a note on there, but we are looking at bringing 2 shelvers on board here soon. We expect to be paying our shelvers approximately minimum wage to start. And I think that's especially where we need help, I think, right now, is with getting our books shelved and back on the shelves. Especially with our new layout, I say especially a lot, but in nonfiction, we have a considerable lack of space to keep a bunch of carts with books on them. And so getting those books back on the shelf is beneficial for our patrons and for the space that we have.
So using that math and the current budget allocation for hourly staff, approximately how many hours of part-time hourly staff are being worked in a given week?
Diane Baker for the record. The approximate hours across the range that we have here, we're looking at, and I didn't put that down, I think it's about 30 hours minimum. Right. And I think that's, it's probably a little on the light side. I'd put it at 40.
Per week?
Per week.
For all of the part-time staff that we're employing?
That's for all of the part-time staff.
Okay.
You're already getting essentially one full-time employee from all of these part-time employees in the
Well,
week.
that's current right now, and
Yeah.
I'm taking that snapshot right at this point, and some of those hours are because we are in the process of hiring 2 full-time positions. So that's the current.
Well, and I do want to note, I mean, that's 30 hours. That's at a lower rate than we can pay any full-time employee, and that's no benefits. So I just want to.
I just pointing out that there was that many hours of work that needed to be done. So on average, how many hours do each one of the part-time people work?
I could work out an average for you, but it's really, we have a few people that just have like 7 or 8 hours, and we have others that are at the higher end, so.
So it's hard to do an
Yeah,
average,
and, yeah.
That would be hard to average that.
Yeah, on that part.
Okay.
I'm not sure it would truly be representative.
Right. Okay.
So for those 30 hours, basically just taking the budget allocation of $45,000 and dividing that by 52 weeks, it's about $865 to pay for those 30 hours. Is that correct?
Sorry, Diane Baker for the record. So that was, on an average, if you're using the $11 an hour, is that what you were using?
No, I'm just taking the 45,000 and dividing it by 52.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's correct.
Because that comes to $28 an hour. Almost 29.
That's like 2 people working at the same time.
Yeah,
2
and
and a half people.
Yeah.
let me double check something. Oh, I can't access that. It's 12. 12. Chris.
So, just doing napkin math. This is nothing official or anything like that. I mean, I'm coming to, with that allotment at an average of $13 an hour, taking into account the 25. So, we're overestimating, and that's okay. I'm coming to 66 and a half hours per week at that cost. Now, I'm sure that there are more costs that are associated with employment, even at the part-time level, and that's probably what we're not taking into account. Would I be correct in assuming that?
I don't think it's near that much. But we'll let Diane do some of the math right now.
I'm double checking my numbers.
I just pulled up the budget docs that we just got. They're not going to go on the board because she doesn't have them. But and right now our projected expenditures for this year are $1.662 million. And that's due to a lot of salary savings, and we had a librarian position that we did not fill from the beginning of the fiscal year until December, and there was a couple reasons for that, but we had a selection, and that selection did not work out, and we were not able to hire that individual, and so then we went back to the hiring table to get someone on board, and that's when we brought on Ermel, and so he started in the beginning of December, so there's like $50,000 worth of salary savings from that position, salary and benefit savings. I'll clarify that. But we are going to be below, but that doesn't automatically change that 0625 line or 0645 line item. It's based on what we started with this year. So that's what you guys are seeing is what we started with this year.
And do you have the 0625 for the fiscal year where we're operating budget 1.662 million?
It's 0645, sorry. It's the 173,390.
Okay, so that maintained from the previous fiscal year. Okay.
And Diane Baker, again, for the record, just to update, I severely underestimated the amount. We are at 55 hours per week at the moment.
Okay, that's what I came up with as well.
Yeah, we're at
So-
55, varying on that number.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, you were being scientific, and I was just taking a wild-ass guess, throwing a number out there to see what we could get for the computers and how much we could push the envelope without impacting the book, the 10% thing. You know, so my 30,000 was just a guess of, you know, where we could get with it. I mean, what would you feel comfortable with asking for? I mean, whatever you could fudge the 10% factor, I would push the limit to it. It's what I would do, because you would always be able to use that for the hourly wage, and then you could use those hours next time around to justify for a full-time employee plus hours.
Well, and what we're working with the number from last year. What we do have to remember, and I'm just looking at this now too, we probably are going to have to make a request in that book budget line item anyway, because we have increased salary and benefits from merit increases and additional costs and benefits. So what that means is we then have to meet, you know, that adds to our budget, and then we still have to meet that. So that's going to be something that we need to look at too. So, I mean, I think that if you guys providing us guidance on asking for hourly funding and asking for funding for computers, we can then make up the rest of that with what we need in that book budget to maintain that 10%, and that could be our supplemental request for the year. I think that would be an easy way to do that.
That's what I was suggesting that you go for, but
So, I mean, I think that would look like a motion of just asking essentially for the addition in those line items as supplementals.
I think that's a good way to
And
go
then,
also.
and maybe choosing a priority between computers and hourly. I mean, I think that we would obviously want to maintain that 10% as priority number one, so that we can leverage grant funding, and then it would just be choosing between the other two.
well, can I make a motion to the effect that we prioritize the supplemental and the 5,000 for the computers, and whatever figure you could come up with an hourly wage, whatever that would be, as you massage the budget with the new figures that you get. I mean, won't the city give you your personnel requirements?
I'm really close to getting to that number.
Okay. Anyway, that's what I was leaning towards.
If we have a computer that dies, does the city have an emergency fund to replace it, or is that waiting years and years, waiting through red tape to replace it?
No, the city won't. The city has an emergency break fix fund for capital improvement projects, like if an elevator breaks, but not, and it's only $100,000, and an elevator costs about $65,000 to fix. Just giving you that estimate. But so no, they do not. And traditionally, they have not. We have. Through our own budget, we have paid for staff computers with city funding, but we have not, since I've been here or that I've known of, used city funding for public computers. So this is a new a new experiment, if you will, on what we're doing, but I think that it leverages the Friends funding very well against the city's funding, and I think that our community really appreciates that type of thoughtful spending, and so that's why we're moving in that direction. But traditionally, it was when Sarah came on board at the library, she was just telling me this last Friday, I thought it was 8 computers. They only had 6 computers. That was 11 years ago. And now we have a lot. No, we have 96 public access computers at the library.
So, continuing my napkin math. So what I'm coming up to is if we were to increase the part-time hourly allotment in the budget by $15,000, that would give us approximately 22 hours a week of part-time staff.
Over and above
what we have now. Does staff feel like that would be? I would think that would be phenomenal for the library, but.
Kathy Rush for the record. Yes, that would be very helpful indeed.
I mean, I know that we always want more, but I think that that's probably a number that we could.
It would be reasonable.
Yeah.
That we could defend and
Exactly.
make it hard for the supervisors to turn down.
Yeah. So I would think that, with a $15,000 increase there, and then, like the $5,000 increase that we're talking about to become a revolving computer update fund that'll then hopefully be matched by the Friends.
Ours is more secure than.
I think that's asking for something that's very feasible, that we can kind of lean on the Board of Supervisors and say, we're not asking for the moon, Because were there any other suggested ideas for supplemental projects or anything like that came to the top of staff's mind?
These are the main ones. I mean, staff have voiced opinions about needing additional help, but last year we received additional funding in our telephone budget, which is what pays for our fiber internet. And I mean, that was a ask for about 4 years before we actually got it funded. And that was just using savings and pulling from different line items to be able to pay that bill. So, we have been successful in getting small pieces from the supervisors in the past. Do current staff have any additions that they would like to add or suggest?
We always need more ebook money.
So that is in the book budget money. So I mean, in addition, the maintaining that 10%. I mean, it's not. It hasn't traditionally been done this way, but if you guys want to dedicate that to ebooks, you can.
I think we got a pretty good chance of getting you more ebook money from the gifting fund.
And then the way that those gift funds from the Friends work, that is still taken into account with the LSTA grant, correct?
Yeah,
That still plays into that 0645?
That's not correct. So
Okay.
So funding from the Friends does not count towards being able to maintain that 10%. That is just, it's your city budget. It's essentially the state's way of ensuring that the community in which has a library supports its library.
I gotcha. Perfect. I mean, in that case, I would think that, because we're working within, that 0645 line item is becoming a constraint, a binding constraint now, because we're playing with getting really close to that. I would think that asking for further funding for that, for every dollar that we get into that line
We
item.
should not have to come up with that 10% out of the budget we already have. They should include that in the budget that they give us. That's there showing the state or the federal government that they support this library by giving that 10% in our budget.
Right, and if we go to the Board of Supervisors and ask for more there, that'll then, as Sina was saying, that becomes part of our ongoing budget.
Right.
So I would think that asking for an increase there as well would be, and once again, we're framing it as we're nickel and diming. We're not going for the
Right, we're not going for the 24-hour
yeah.
So this is what I have so far, and it's not ranked. This is just in the order in which I typed it. $5,000 for computers, which would be in our operating supplies line item, so that's 0625, just for the record. Then our hourly, $15,000, which is our 0102. And then maintaining 10% at least in the book budget line item.
I don't see anything terribly overreaching in putting all of those together. It seems like a pretty reasonable request. And let me just clarify for my own self that you said once we get that $5,000 for the computers in there as a supplemental, then it would automatically be a part of the budget from then on?
Correct. If it's entered in as a supplemental, it becomes part of your base budget for the years after that. Obviously, the only things that would change that is if there was another recession and the board asked to cut a certain percentage and we cut funding, that might be where that comes from. That would be something you guys would also get to decide. So.
I think your budget needs another line there. The one showing all the savings that you come up with the people in the city using our books. Didn't we agree to put that on the budget line?
We are still working on that project, and we will have it done before the budget meeting.
But it's going to be on the budget, right?
Well, that's just our copy of the budget. So, we can put it on our copy of the budget, but
But we need to put it on the budget the supervisors see.
I'll ask Nick.
Well, that's our job as the Board of Trustees coming to the Board of Supervisors and saying, these are the cost savings that we as the library are affording the community. Yeah, absolutely. I think it should. I don't disagree. So.
Well, at the very least, it should be a statement at the bottom of the page.
I do want to say what you were holding is what we created from the budget. So that's not from the city. Just clarification there.
Motion on this?
Yeah, so unless there's any further discussion, which I would absolutely entertain, I would entertain a motion regarding this discussion.
I will make a motion that we ask for a supplement to the budget of $5,000 to cover the cost of replacing 5 computers, with knowing that we will get another $5,000 matching funds for the Friends, that we add $15,000 to the hourly wage allotment. Is that how that was supposed to work? Mm-hmm. And that the city makes sure that we still have at the very least the 10% of our total budget for the book budget.
If not more.
If not, I said at the very least.
I'll second it.
Okay.
All right, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries.
Good.
And with that, I've lost my agenda.
We got all out of order here.
All right, with that, we can move on to, I believe we're on 5D. Yeah, 5D.
Oh, this is exciting. Okay. So this is discussion and possible action on a special meeting for a board retreat. Dates of the board training retreat dates for board training, library policy review, and library strategic plan review. Possible dates, and I've listed some out here. It does look like we may be doing our Summer Learning Challenge kickoff on the 10th. That doesn't mean we can't have a board retreat on that day. It just means there's going to be a lot going on at the library. But we did a board retreat with the Board of Supervisors here in early February, and it was a really good opportunity for them to hear what's going on in the community, essentially from staff, and what's coming up to the plate, like low-income housing and things like that. And I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to do our own board retreat to kind of talk about some of these things. We have a strategic plan that's going to be coming to a close. The grant we just wrote for LSTA is for a strategic planning grant, so we have a strategic planning process coming up. And then I thought it would be a good time for board members to get some training. I have reached out also to the state library, and they actually have some board training online. I think John may have accessed it at one point when he started, but I will make sure that gets sent out to all of you so that you can access it. It's not going to be Nevada specific. Nevada library law is unique, but it will give you some training on just different library board related issues. But we won't be going over those videos in this training. I'm going to see what we can do to get library law specific individuals available for you to discuss with you. The state library would be involved, and possibly the AG that represents the state library.
So is it 1 day or 2 days?
It would be 1 day, and then in the future, just to kind of keep this on your radar, Diane and I were talking, since we don't really have to do a meeting in January and traditionally haven't, what we might do instead is a board retreat in January, and then we can start that budget planning process during that board retreat and have the city CFO come and tell the board what it's looking like and what type of money we have to look at and all of that. And I think that would be helpful for you guys and for us in our planning process.
No, I think that sounds phenomenal. I would think that the weekend of the kickoff of the summer learning program would probably be a little rough. I know that I would be available for the 3rd or the 16th. I don't know about the other members of the board if they have a preference for either of those.
And we can consider other dates. We selected these dates because we do know that we have working board members. So.
The 3rd and the 10th are the best for my schedule.
I can do any of them, so whatever the rest of you decide.
We can bring it up at the next meeting for action if we want to do that, if we want to let Trustee Liverati check.
Yeah. Just for information's sake, it sounds like I would push for the 3rd, but yeah, let's table this until next meeting when everybody has had time to check their schedules and all that.
Okay.
So. All right, if there's no further discussion on that one, then we'll move on to 5E.
Okay, Diane Baker for the record. We're bringing this back with some additional information that was requested at the last meeting. I did update the information that we had there before to bring it up to the latest budget figures, budget report that we had, so you can see where we're at within the hourly budget at this point. Also consider when you're looking at the figures, we're 58% into the year and 50% spent. Some of the times that we were closed, we did not have the number of hourly workers during the 6 to 8 weeks. We did use them for some of the time, but not for the total number of hours that they would have been working had we had just regular open hours. Okay, so you see the projections, and this is, again, that can fluctuate, but that's our general projection of expenses through 6/30, the end of the year. That shows a balance of a little over $7,000. We still have 2 shelvers to hire, and potentially also we have an additional position of library clerk that we would be looking to hire with that, and that would be in the $10 an hour range for a library clerk. Also, what requested was our turnover rate in this fiscal year. It was 36%. We have the reasons listed here. We did have 2 individuals that graduated and went on to bigger and better, and then personal and education. So that was 4 individuals out of our part-timers that you see. I also included, based on hourly rate, what the hourly rate change would be at 3% and 5%. And then the hourly that I projected, I put in $8.50 an hour. The current minimum is $8.25, but I put in $8.50 for our projections. And on the second sheet, it just shows you where I got the projections as we went out and what it would be. That will be at about where we will be for this current year for our shelvers. So just $1,870. That's a rough projection. There are some additional costs that are hard to calculate because workman's comp is included with our hourlies as well. Even though they don't have benefits, there's still basic liability, workman's comp, and things that do have to be included in that. So that number is probably a little closer to $2,000 in reality. So based on what was asked at the last meeting, I think we tried to give you the additional information. I'm not sure if you had any additional questions, or if this helps clarify enough on how you would like to proceed.
I made a suggestion to Sina that I wanted to give raises to the part-time at certain points. However, we look at the evaluations, and if you're evaluating them after a year, you're only really evaluating them as a part-time yearly person, so that they only have worked in relationship to a full-time person. They've only worked half a year, where a full-time person would be getting a raise because they've done the 1080 or 2080, whatever the number is. Right. They've only worked half of that if they've come up to it. So to me, a part-time person shouldn't be eligible to get a raise for 2 years. After an evaluation. They can be evaluated every year, every 6 months for whatever you want, but they shouldn't be eligible for a raise until they meet what would be a full-time equivalency. That's where I would be going with this. So I'm supportive of giving them raises, but I want to keep it in the same vein as somebody who's a full-time employee, that they've worked that period of time.
So are you saying that their hours should be equivalent to what a full-time would be? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Or because some of them aren't working, 30 hours a week. They're working maybe, 10. Yeah. Right,
but what I'm saying is that a full-time person isn't eligible for a merit increase unless they've worked a full year on their anniversary date, right? So we shouldn't be having a part-time person being able to get the same equivalent of a full-time person because they're only working half the time. I would support them getting the raises, but they would have to work twice the time.
So
It would be equivalent of a full...
2,080
Yeah.
hours.
That's what Or if they started on January 1st, then it would be 2 years on January 1st. It wouldn't have to be the 2080 hours. I would just make it the 2-year period.
So that, just a clarification, that sounds like it might come out to every other year if they end up being a longer term.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, and then, the thing about the kids working through college or high school, they would, wouldn't even come up into that. And if you wanted to go by hours, you could do it by hours, just, track it that way.
Diane Baker, again for the record, tracking by hours could be done. It would be a more complex system to set up on that.
Whatever you feel comfortable with, I'm just saying. Whatever you feel comfortable with, I'm just saying that I don't think you should do it once a year. I think it needs to be the extended period.
And just as a point of information, we do, under the HR system, do evaluate every year. But every other year, we can take your suggestion on how you want to handle.
So, jumping back to the other figures, you guys gave me so many numbers to play with, and I love it. Looking at what, say, a library assistant is making over the course of the year between $54,000 and $56,000, and then what the part-time staff are making, few $100s a pay period. I would think that if we have part-time staff that's staying on for a full year, the 3% and 5% increases that we're talking about is less than 50 cents an hour. I realize that that's going to decrease the overall number of hours that we're going to be able to employ people, but hopefully over the course of that year, they're going to be learning enough that, that hours savings, or the hours that we're losing, are made up for in increases in productivity. Right. And I am all about equating the marginal product of labor with their wages as an economist. So I would push for the rate increases to be similar to those that the employees are currently enjoying, the full-time employees are currently enjoying. But I would love to discuss it further.
How would you measure the increase in productivity objectively?
Objectively, I think that would be difficult to measure. I mean, we're talking about people who are shelving books and things like that, so books shelved per hour or something like that, which I'm sure is a metrics that we're not tracking. But that's why we're doing the reviews, right? We're saying, okay, well, this person meets or exceeds the standards that we're setting for a bookshelf or something like that. So, they're doing well enough to say, oh, okay, well, they're becoming very proficient in shelving books based on their review, and that's worth the increase to their hourly rate, I would hope.
I agree, because a 4-hour-a-week person may be much more efficient than a 6-hour-a-week person or a 7-hour-a-week person.
Right, and it would make sense to pay those employees more and, potentially retain them and then, potentially have them move into a full-time capacity. So that would be my recommendation. That's what I would like to see happen.
Just have a question. When you're doing these reviews and talking about merit increases, does the city specify that they have to be given a certain number before the merit increase is allowed or applied?
I'm going to pull up the review sheet right now and look at it, but you can.
Sure, and I'm not sure, I mean, that we do have a specific matrix that we use for evaluation. Are you asking, does the city have a specific percentage for when you meet certain levels?
No, I just wondered does the city require that, or do you get to decide that? And if I don't know what your rating system is. Is it a number rating system when you give the reviews? Do you give everybody a raise, or do you give just those people who have, like, say, 4 and above a raise?
Well, the system is number-based in the categories, and the numbers, as they're added up, do equal, below standard, meets standards, above, exceeds. So that's how those levels are identified. And then within, for CCEA and for managers, both of them have either contracts or agreements that identify if you hit, if you're at this level, this is the percentage, and, above standard exceeds. So there are set percentages that are tied to each level in the evaluation.
Okay, that helps. I mean, this day and age when we're coddling everybody, if everybody who gets a review gets a raise, that kind of defeats the whole purpose of reviewing people. So,
well, I believe generally with the last contract and it's available on HR's website, but the last contract was specifically set up as merit-based.
I'm trying to find one that's not a manager one because they are different in how they rank.
Okay, I want to ask a somewhat obvious question, but I don't know the answer to it. Since the employees are employees of the city, are the evaluations generic or are they library focused?
So the evaluation forms that we use from HR are it's a generic form, but it is tied to the job description. So I think the answer is that it is tied to what their job performance is tied to their job description. It's just the form that we fill out is general, but it is connected to your job description. Does that help?
Yes, it does. That's exactly what I was getting at. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So to give you an example, it's rated 1. Each of these items are rated 1 to 4. 1 being below expectations, 2 being meets, 3 being above, and 4 being outstanding. And you have job knowledge, quality of work, adherence to city's policies and procedures, organizing assignments and time management, teamwork and collaboration, positive and timely service to department and the public, initiative, punctuality and attendance, and cooperation and flexibility.
See, those to me are generic. Those are HR questions.
But they're specific back to their actual job description. Then those are the numbers that you rate, and then you do have an area that you put in employee strengths or areas of improvement, and then objectives for the next time. And so you should also be rating them on those objectives and if those have been completed and how those were completed based on those generic items that we talked about.
And then is the overall an average of those or a weighted average?
It's a total score. And so 0 to 13 is below expectations. 14 to 22 is meets expectations. 23 to 31 is above expectations. And 32 to 36 is outstanding. And then the merits are based on meets, above, and outstanding. You do not get a merit if you are below expectations. You get a improvement plan. Really on a meets expectations though, at 3%, the majority of that is cost of living increase in reality.
And then at what point does the 5%, is that at the exceeds or the outstanding? Do you know?
The amounts that I had here were general chosen, the CCEA contract. It's 3%, 4.5, and then
5.5.
5.5. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
But for managers or essentially any at-will employee, which is an hourly employee or a manager, it is 3, 4, and 5.
I mean, I would think that it would make the most sense to maintain the CCEA for the at-will and managers, the 3, 4, and 5%. Is there any discussion of that from the board?
First of all, one of the questions we had on this the last time was that there wasn't enough money in the budget to cover these raises, right?
Well, I mean, there's enough money. It just means less hours that we can work them. I mean, that's the...
Yeah, that was the question. We couldn't just flat out give everybody raises on the same hours they're working now, and because it wasn't in the budget.
Is that true? Is employment high enough that it would exceed the $45,000 in the annual budget right now?
Well, that would be it would come up next year. I mean, obviously, if we got the 15,000, it wouldn't. But I'm not exactly sure what that equates to on a per worked hour basis.
So within this particular fiscal year, because of the timeframes where we weren't open and the like, we could probably just make it. On that part, it'd be, I'd have to be calculating, but it would be close. And then in the next fiscal year, with if we got the supplemental, as Sina said, that would be not an issue. If we didn't get the supplemental, then we would probably have to have a further discussion on how to proceed.
This might be a council question. It might be a Sina question. Can we, as the board, indicate that our recommendation or our action be enacted for fiscal 19, such that the library staff has time to prepare for the repercussions of the action?
I have a fear that the council will look at the 15,000 request as part of the increasing the giving a salary increase.
See, that's what, instead of getting
Now,
extra hours, they're gonna
that's
just
not
get-
what the intent is.
Right.
This is not an answer to your question yet, but I did want to point out that essentially if we did give everybody 5% on a budget of $45,000, what we're talking about is $2,250. Right. I mean, we could add that to the 15,000 that we're requesting, or it could just come out of that amount that we're requesting, and then when we present to the supervisors, then we can bring up the fact that we want to be able to provide these increases to part-time staff, and that is why this is being asked for. I do know in previous years, I can't point to exactly which department, this has been done before and it has passed, but that doesn't mean that they would make that choice this time around.
How many of those employees have worked 2 years or more?
On this list here,
I think all but Elizabeth.
All but Elizabeth.
So
yeah.
all but EM.
Yeah, all but the one has been 2 years or more.
So if we gave them a raise, or if we were able to give them a performance raise for this year, the likelihood is if they stayed with us, and we wouldn't be giving them another one for 2 years.
Correct, till 2020.
Correct.
I can live with that. Right, savings. It won't be a condition.
So then it sounds like we won't require the council's recommendation as to whether or not we can enact this for fiscal 19. We can
Just do it.
Okay. So in that case, if there's no further discussion on this issue, I would entertain a motion.
Before we go to the motion, is it clear that we're evaluating these people on a 2-year? Are you going to write the policy to that? Because that's what I'm suggesting.
That wasn't my recommendation.
Well, that would be my recommendation.
I'm
It's the only
opposed to
way to
that.
do that. Merit thing.
Yeah. So what I was advocating for would be the annual, because my reason for that is that the amount of money that these people are making is a quarter of what a full-time staffer is doing. And I feel that
you're not going to get a full-time staffer every 6 months, give them a raise, are you?
No, and that's why it's a percentage-based raise.
That's what the full-time staff get. They get a percentage-based wage too. They get it annually.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying for part-time staff as well.
They're not working a full-time
They're not getting
equivalency.
paid for a full-time position either.
Yeah, they're not exactly.
The raise is like a quarter, so.
Excuse me, is it difficult to fill or keep part-time staffers in the library?
It depends. I mean, no, I know we don't love that question, but it really just depends on who we've got to apply in that cycle, because we can't keep it open forever. A lot of times we've been able to have people who volunteered and then a full-time position has come available and then they come into that position. Bryce is an example of that. And he's a part-time position or part-time employee that has done that very well. I mean, he came and attended classes, then he became a volunteer, and then he became an employee, and he's now 18. But so yes and no. Bryce is going to go off to college, so I mean, we are going to lose our good students for the most part because they are moving on with their lives, and it might not be here in Carson City. I mean, we've been very fortunate that 2 of our staff members who go to UNR still work for us because they've chose not to move to Reno, and they live in Carson City and go to school in Reno. So that part is a difficulty, but I mean, I think we could maybe answer that question a little more thoroughly once we also hire our 2 new shelvers and kind of see where that goes. But we really haven't had to bring on people on board that we didn't know in some way because of their previous involvement with the library.
So it's not a wage issue, in your opinion? Let's discount the students because we know they're going to move on or whatever for the most part. Is it a wage issue or the fact that it's only a part-time job? Can you address that in any way?
Well, the one thing I'm going to say in observations is the economy's getting better. and somebody who may have needed to take a part-time job when the economy wasn't that great. And that's, even with Zolina, we have her on call, but her position at the state library became a full-time position. So that's why we only get her on call, and we don't get her more, a consistent hours, because she now has a full-time job. So I think that is going to be something that, we're coming into a better economy. It probably will be harder to hire good staff at the rates that we do have, because we're coming into a better economy. I think that Amy might have something she'd like to share on this topic.
I was just remembering when I used to work in bookstores and part-time in libraries, we did tend to get yearly raises, usually in the quarter to 50-cent range. And that definitely ended pretty abruptly with the recession, but before that, that was pretty normal.
And I'm not necessarily advocating for this, but where I see where John is talking about is, and maybe like if instead of using a 3 and a 5, if we used a 1.5 and a 2.5 percentage rate, then that would be equivalent to what full-time staff are getting. That's a different way to do that than doing it every 2 years. Just throwing that out there.
1.5% times 2 is 3, so.
That probably makes it more palatable, if you will, to the employee that they're still getting a raise every year, even though.
A merit increase if they deserve it.
And you said that at the 5%, that it's a difference of $2,200?
Yeah, $2,250.
Right.
On the current $45,000 budget.
Mm-hmm.
If we're looking at our $60,000 budget, say we do get that amount, we're looking at like $3,000. But if we're spending that $60,000 and we're needing essentially an extra $3,000 each year to maintain that, it's something to think about in coming back to the Board of Supervisors to request funding.
Well, also doesn't become logarithmic because these wages stay at that level from year to year, and then it'll be 1.5 every year, right?
Correct. So, I'm just saying at that level, because at some point in time, if we're not requesting for additional hourly funding every year, we are going to have to reduce staff hours. Like, we can't just continually increase them. One, part-time staff in the city can't work more than 20 hours a week or 1039 in a year. So, we have that we could hit and be okay. But then if you brought on another person, it's just that's what we're looking at, just to keep that in mind.
To give perspective to the logarithmic function that you're worried about, over the course of 5 years on a $10 wage, it's 77 cents total. Huh? And I'm just giving perspective to the numbers.
I'm not saying mathematically.
No, I understand.
But Sina, since we are requesting the $15,000 as a supplement, would it not be like the computer thing that next year that budget would be $60,000?
That would be correct. But if, like I said, if we're spending that $60,000 and yeah. And so, just take that into consideration, that, and the board of supervisors will be thinking about and looking at the long-term costs of giving that money to us up front. Don't forget that part too.
How about instead of giving them the cost of living, why don't you look at readjusting the salaries?
What?
Because you're saying that it's a better economy and you're afraid that some of these people may be moving on to other jobs. Maybe it would be better just to give them a higher wage for the time being.
Are we still talking about part-time staff?
Okay, so what I will say is that our library shelver and library clerk are in line with what other libraries in this region pay, if not a little bit higher than those. And I don't think that we would be able to make that argument. That would be a Board of Supervisor argument to make, and I don't think that that argument would, yeah. We are giving at a 3 and a 5. That's more than cost of living, but that meets expectations level. That is a little bit more, about I think it's like 1.2% more than a cost of living increase. But that's just for doing your job. Yes, it's
You're meeting the job requirements that you were getting paid for.
and what Diane put up here, she put the 3% and the 5%. I mean, that's intended, and we would have to put a 4% in between there. But that's just to give you the low and the high of what that looks like. But in a review, they could either receive nothing, nothing plus a improvement plan, or 3%, 4%, or 5% based on their review. So if they're just meeting expectations, so if they're just doing their job, then they would be at that 3%. If they are a stellar shelver and shelve like carts and carts an hour, then they would get that higher rate, and then they would be rewarded and hopefully want to stay based on receiving that rate.
Right, and to your point about the cost of living, so the consumer price index for all urban consumers increased 2.1% over the last 12 months. So that is what that's doing, basically. I mean, there's a 9/10 of a percentage point differential there. So,
Do we know what these deviations are in those two?
Sina, can you shed any light on the wages for KK and EM, the $15.45 and the $25?
So KK is Chris. She is our clerical aide, and essentially she does work on desk occasionally, but she is Diane and I's right hand. She prepares all board meeting stuff. She does all of the background for the financial pieces. So she's doing our P card. She's doing our direct pays, and I mean, she's doing all of it, and we're signing off on it. And so her level of work is much higher. That's not a shelver level position. And she is paid within that clerical aid. So if it was a full-time clerical aid, she is paid an hourly rate that is equivalent to that full-time position. We don't have any position descriptions or anything or rate or ranges for a full-time library clerk or a full-time shelver because they don't exist. But a full-time clerical aide does exist. And then EM, that's Elizabeth Markle. She came on board when it was tough for us to get that librarian position on board. She's helping us still processing some of the, we have a ton of new items that have just come in because we've been closed for a while, and so she's helping us process those. But she's a librarian. She's a librarian level employee, and again, she is being paid an hourly rate equivalent to what a full-time librarian would make. Does that help?
So yeah, that does. And they're making. I mean, these are. Is that mine or yours? I mean, so when you look at employees like that are in this part-time hourly, I mean, I would say they if I had to decide one way or the other, I think they should be looked at every year for merit increase because they're doing this higher level work. I don't know if like 1.2% would be.
What is that, 5 cents?
Yeah, like nothing for
Yeah.
that's 10 cents for that.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I would advocate the 3, 4, and 5 on an annual basis. If there's no further discussion, I would entertain a motion on this item.
All right, I'll make a motion. I will make a motion to the 3, 4, and 5% merit increase based on their annual reviews.
I'll second that.
Okay, those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
One opposed. The motion carries. That was E. All right, in that case, we can move on to item 5F, rental space proposals.
Okay, so this is something that I wanted to bring up and just briefly have a little bit of discussion on. It is possible action, but I would ask that you not take action on this today. We definitely would need to come up with a payment schedule and a usage agreement form and a bunch of different items before we have a full action on this item. But the staff summary, I'm just going to read it into the record, but the library is considering offering space for rent to outside entities so they may offer paid service to the public. Example 1 is allowing outside businesses to use library space to conduct business with a client, example tutoring. Example 2, exploring the addition of a coffee cart or like service, selling coffee to patrons, in turn paying a lease fee for space. And then example 3, offering yoga in the digitorium at a cost to patrons, and the yoga business would provide a flat fee to the library for use of that space. Why we're bringing this up is we're being asked about this more. I mean, there isn't a ton of space in town, and space is expensive. The Parks and Rec does have a schedule that could be similar to something we would use, and agreement forms for spaces like what we're in right now. We're a city entity. We don't pay to use this facility, but if we weren't a city entity, we would pay. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And then on my tour of the library, Brad Bronkowski, supervisor from Ward 2, was not able to be at the grand reopening, and so he came through for a tour prior to that, and one of his suggestions was looking at exploring the addition of a coffee cart or like service, either inside the building or potentially outside. We have that little nook that essentially people still try to smoke in occasionally, and it would be nice to not have that space for people to smoke in, but in the nook there where a business can make some money, but we could also make a little bit of money off of that, and not to replace any of our current budget, but we have received less funds from the Friends this year, and they are doing that based on what they are actually making rather than taking funding out of savings like they have in the past for us. And so this could be a way to offset some of that cost or some of that funding into our budget. And so that is why, because really all of these are kind of the same. I mean, yes, if you're leasing space to a coffee cart, it's not exactly the same as offering a class in the Digitorium, but it is very similar. And so that's kind of where we need to have this discussion, and the board needs to decide on a policy if we are going to go forward and do this. Or is there any questions or opinions on this currently?
So are these examples, like, just, so you just want to open it up to, like, different things like this? Like, these aren't it's not limited to
No,
this.
these are just examples. I mean, we allow individuals to tutor individuals in the library. We don't charge them. We're probably never going to do that. But, you know, one of the things that I do think we need to consider is we do have public space in our collaboration rooms, and we do have the Digitorium. Now, the Digitorium is a little different because it has a lot of expensive equipment in it. But, you know, do we want somebody to be able to come in to the library to sell a product and advertise that that they're selling it in the library space? I mean, there's things I think we need to be careful with and really identify what type of client we want in that space to offering service, and how we want to restrict the ability to advertise that it is in library space. Because, you know, one of the examples, and there's nothing wrong with essential oils, but do we want somebody from a multi-level marketing company to be able to come in and use that space to sell their product?
Right, because there's a big difference between grabbing a cup of coffee and reading a book and being sold something.
Yes. So I think we do need to take that into consideration when looking at this. And this was to get this on the agenda and get this on your minds. One of the times, or one of the places that I think it will be appropriate to address this in more detail is going to be at our board retreat when we're talking about library policy. And this is a good piece that we can put in there and have some discussion. And, you know, Washoe County, they do rent out their space. We can look and see what they're doing. I can see if we can't maybe get one of their director or their assistant director down to talk about how they do that and why they do what they do. I think that would be helpful in us making a decision moving forward as well.
So when it says allow outside businesses to use the library space to conduct business with a client, isn't there some of that already? Like, don't you have conference rooms upstairs?
We do have conference rooms upstairs. Right now, our policy is that you have to have a library card to reserve it. Now, we don't know that there's any cash transactions or monetary transactions going on. Some of the tutoring might be free, some of it might be paid. I don't know, but that was put in here really that is tutoring, but that is also potentially a multi-level marketing company. So, it's something that we're going to want to address so that we can specify what type of business we do want going on in the library. Because I think that there could very well be appropriate classes that are taught in the library that might be a cost to patrons.
Right.
But that we just can't offer it for free. I mean, that's like the yoga class there. Like we can't always, like, when we pay for somebody to come in and offer a program, we also don't want them to charge people, right, to take that program because we've just paid for it. But sometimes we can't pay the amount that is that program because it's expensive. But patrons could offset that cost by, say, $5 a person. When we've been able to cover some of that program, but then patrons are able to cover that other part. Some libraries do actually charge a $5 fee to take any class. That also reduces the amount of people who don't show for classes.
So, you're going to want to make sure people aren't competing also with the free classes that you guys are offering.
Correct.
So, do they have up in Washoe a policy that they use on this?
For their meeting spaces, yes, because it's I think it's $25 an hour is their rental fee for their spaces, but they generally have an actual. It would be like our digitorium before we put digitorium things in it that they rent out to the public, and in those spaces, it is actually a little bit easier for patrons to be able to use the space because they can get in separately and they don't have to turn off an alarm. Those types of things, because the other thing we have to consider is, do we allow people to use the space before or after hours? What does that look like? Because I think we could, but we're going to have to charge them more so that we can cover the cost of staffing that, because we're going to need to have staff at the library. Another way that I think we would need to do it, especially if we wanted to use the digitorium for that type of purpose, would be needing to install the card key locks so that they could get into the side door that just goes into the digitorium with a card that they can check out from the library, rather than trying to get into that space in another way. And that might also require us, if we did need to use an alarm code, that we would need to put in an additional panel in the digitorium for them to be able to put the code in. But that, those types of costs can be covered by charging individuals to use the space, which is beneficial, because if not, we would have to find a key to install key card access at the libraries would be about $6,000, and I believe it's like $2,000 for any additional door.
So I think, like you said, this is primarily to get us to start thinking about
Correct.
this. I think that going forward, a couple of the things that I would like to see are you said recreation, Carson City Recreation Department. They've got
Parks and Rec, yep.
They've got some standards in place that we could probably, take a look at. Taking a look at Washoe County's policies based, for their meeting spaces and things like that. Specifically looking at if they limit, the types of companies that can come in or anything like that, I think would be very helpful.
So I'm going to have to look into that, but that could be iffy just for so many reasons.
Oh, no, I agree. I definitely agree.
And that's why, just so you guys know, that's why we really haven't touched this before. We don't want, it is a public library. We don't want to necessarily have those limits, but at the same time, it's a public library, and we want to be able to maintain that it's a public space, kind of free from that.
Now, how are the those meeting spaces, the collaboration rooms and things like that, how is that currently being utilized?
So a patron can go online and reserve the room, and then when they get there, they check it out. What that allows us to do is, if there then is any damage or anything to the room, we can charge their account for it. That has not happened so far. They can also just come in and check out the room, but we have 3 collaboration rooms, and we'll be adding the executive collaboration room, which was the former going to be makerspace room. And we have a lot of people using those spaces. I don't think so much after we've reopened back up. But before that, we were having pretty consistent usage. We also have, there's a social worker who comes in actually and offers services, and he uses one of those rooms as it's a private space that he can meet with individuals who are interested in getting help filling out paperwork for certain services and things.
Like it is a nonprofit thing.
He works for the state. Mm-hmm. He's
So
a social
definitely
worker for the
nonprofit.
state.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, but you know what we require, and I mean we've had groups. We've had AT&T actually came in and was training their staff in one of our rooms. They had like 6 staff members, and they were doing a training with the TV, and we just require one of the people in that group to have a library card, and then they check it out with that library card.
And you're not currently charging or anything like that? Okay.
The other piece that we have been able to work with the city on and risk management on is they actually really do want individuals to be showing insurance for any use of any meeting spaces. But with our collaboration rooms, because the amount of people is so low, and because it is when we are open and we are requiring a library card with that, we've been able to not require proof of insurance for that. But I do believe that any of these other items would require proof of insurance and city named insurance, and it's actually pretty pricey. It's not just to get Carson City named on the insurance. I think it's $190 for a single use
Minimum, yeah.
So I mean, it's not. It adds a lot of cost to being able to use the space.
Well, and just coming from a small business perspective, I know it's hard to find space here in Carson to meet with people, and $25 an hour, when you're just starting your business can be, steep if you have to use it for several hours. That's a big, it can be a big cost for a starting business.
Another example, Scoops, when they were hiring, they actually used one of our collaboration rooms for interviews. So, I mean, I don't want to prevent those things from happening, and I don't expect to charge for our collaboration rooms, because I think that is, even if it's a similar clientele, it's a different purpose. And, letting the community and small businesses use that space, I think is well worth that. I mean, it's an offer of good faith to the community to be able to use that space, and Scoops loved it. They're huge library users, and came back and actually was at the grand reopening doing the VR. She did 3 times in a row. So I mean, I don't want to limit that, because it builds good library patrons. But using the Digitorium space, or even like our training hub for certain things. When I first started, we had a outside private tester who used our training hub computers to do ASL, sign language testing. But she was charging, and this is before I became director, but she was charging the students to take the test, but then the library wasn't seeing any of that funding, and it required staff to be here not during open hours, which was not covered, because they weren't paying to use the space. So that's where, I'd like to be able to offer those computers and that ability, but I think we would need to have some recovery funding on some of that.
Yeah, so I think that, like you said, not taking action on this now and getting a little bit more information about organizations that are currently doing this would be extremely helpful. So if there's no further discussion from staff, I think we'll table this one. And that means that we can move on to item 6, the Library Director Administrative Reports.
Okay, I am going to go through this. I'm going to go a little bit faster maybe than I normally do. Do pop in if you have any questions. We just did have a lot of action items on today's agenda. So what you're seeing here, the first page of this report, you'll see the graph for the funding that we've received from the Friends is about 3.4% of our total budget, 3.5% grant funding, and then 9.29% is general funds from the city. In the expenditures, you're going to see where we've expended. And we've mainly expended from our Friends of the Library and from our general fund, though with this is early February reports, and so with the addition of all our makerspace equipment that some of you did get to see at the grand reopening, if you haven't seen it, please come by and take a look. But that will be greatly changed in our next report under the grant funds. We have spent a pretty penny in getting those items in. We did want to wait until we had a place for them to come before buying them. That's why we bought them so close to our opening. So then in the general fund, you're going to see how our expenditures look here. And then if you go into the page after the graph, you are going to see that we are 58% of the year lapsed according to this report, and we are about 54% expended. So we're holding good on that. One of the things that was requested from us today is, and we'll be reviewing what we can and cannot do to help meet this, but the more funding that we revert, the more money they have for capital improvement projects for this coming year. And so we will be looking at what that means for us and moving forward that way. I mean, we are gonna need to see some of that in our hourly, because we have positions that weren't filled and we needed to use hourly more. But we'll see what we can't revert back
But then
to the city.
if the library reverts those funds, that doesn't necessarily mean that the library gets those funds.
That is absolutely correct.
Right.
However, we will, but we also received, about $80,000 worth of capital improvement projects this year, and we definitely did not revert $80,000 worth of funding last year. So, and public safety and fire are really two of the big things that come up consistently, and we use public safety. We've had to call the sheriff's department more than usual in the last couple weeks. So I don't want to take anything away from, what they might need, because that also impacts on how they can provide service to us. So then the next graph you're going to see is our grant funding. We've mainly expended in the NASA at My Library, and our statewide reading summer learning challenge grant from last year is what is shown here as expended. We will start spending on our state collection development grant here soon, and our community development grant is being expended at this time as well. And then the Makerspace grant is the one that I was telling you will see some expenses next time.
The Playaway grant is about half spent also.
Oh yeah, that's the mini. Is that on here?
It's not on your graph.
We need
it's
to
on
put
the
it
next
on
page,
here.
Though.
Okay, yeah, we need to get it on
It's
there.
about $2,000 spent.
So the Playaways are little devices that you can, essentially portable audiobooks that you don't need a CD player for, that you can plug into your car, you can just listen to. And then we also have some Playaway Views, which are ones that you can actually watch and view. Okay, so then the next is our gift fund and our friends funding, and what our expenses are to date. We have expended some of the funding for the information desk. We do still have some storage left that we need to purchase to go underneath it, but if you haven't seen it, it is our giant Lego desk, and it's awesome. And it definitely reminds me of the Lego movie, like every time I see it. Everything is awesome. We are playing that song at our next staff development day.
Yes, we are.
That yes.
So it is stated, so it shall be.
So So that Friends funding expended on here will be shown soon, and we have up to $15,000. I don't expect us to spend that full amount on those desks, and so we'll be coming back to the Friends to see how we can expend the rest of that funding, but I don't think it will be $15,000. We did have to get a couple more bricks based on our measurements. We actually got the short desk really short, and it needed to go up at least one more layer. So, and then you'll see the gift fund and all of the expenses here from the gift fund. And one of the things just relating to part-time staffing. So James, he goes to the Boys and Girls Club, and he's our Boys and Girls Club coordinator, and that is it's traditionally been spent out of Friends funding, but we do believe that we'll be able to absorb that in our temporary staffing budget because he is on marathon for us. And so that's where we're going to find a little bit of that, we asked for $55,000, we only got $38,000. That's where some of that's going to come from so that we can put that on our regular budget. So if you don't see that next fiscal year, that's why. That's where I'm going with that. Are there any questions on this report? Okay. Do you want me to just move on to B?
Yes,
okay.
Please. Sorry.
No worries. So I'll say it again, I guess. So Kim left at the end of December. We have hired a new Digitorium facilitator on board. Her name is Jen, or Jennifer Yamas. And she is from Carson, a Reno UNR graduate, and is back here in Carson and has worked at like the Discovery Museum and a couple different fun places. And she actually, today was her 4th day working. Her first day was on Friday during the grand reopening. So that was kind of a fun day to be your first day. And then Natalie let us know that she had accepted a position in Douglas County at the beginning of December while we were starting our move. And she did stick around until the beginning of January, and definitely has been very helpful and, in not putting us in difficult situations and accommodating the programs and different things that we were scheduled to do, and has come back to volunteer for 2 programs, and we're still working with her on the early childhood education project, and that is on March 3rd at the Boys and Girls Club. It's the Childhood Expo. So that's been good, and we have recruited for, we have not hired nor interviewed for the Creative Learning Manager. We will be doing that soon with the grand reopening and everything. It's been a little bit crazy, so we're trying to get that time to complete interviews for that. So then really what my report is the annual report, which is in your packet. I think it might be printed, and you received one of the professionally printed copies. So this report is what we put together for 2017, and it is 2017, though the statistics in it are 16-17 based on the fiscal year rather than the actual year. It's a little easier to put together that way. And we took snippets from the different programs and the different things that we had written about in press releases throughout the year and put that in here. And the story stroll, I just want to note that we were actually recognized from I think it's Parks and Rec magazine, so on a national level for that program, and we hope to do that again, and I actually would like to see that in a couple more parks in our community, because that could be a lot of fun. Of course, the pedal library that the Friends funded for us. And then you'll see the fold with our statistics. So these are statistics that we report to the state and are required to report to the state to be qualified for federal funding. That's one of the other pieces. And so that's what we have in here are just the standard, what we need to report statistics. We will eventually get that one that John really wants in here. The ROI, and what we'll end up doing is once we do have that, we'll print that on a single page and we'll put that in our annual reports that we can hand out. We then we chose to highlight one of our library staff members. This time it was Kathy. So that's what you're seeing in this report, and it's about her life a little bit and her work with the snake and the mural at the library. And we'll continue to do this for different staff throughout when we do annual reports, because I think this is a good way for our community to get to know staff in a way that's very approachable. And then on the back, again, we just have some additional stories about what we've done this year. And the library sets sight on moon and stars, and then our national medal nomination. So that is kind of the conclusion of my report. Are there any questions about the annual report?
Very well done. Who did the picture?
So Kat actually hired a local artist to do the picture for us. So that is provided by a local artist.
That's phenomenal. Thank you very much, Sina. All right, with that, we'll move on to item 7, our other administrative reports, starting with access services.
Kathy Rush, Access Services Manager, for the record. So in your packet, there is an Access Services report that highlights the addition of our new circulation librarian, Irma Reinhardt, who started the week before we closed for the refresh project, and I'm very happy that he had an opportunity to see the library the way it was and kind of get to know us. And then he has since voiced appreciation for being able to be part of the whole project, and not only to kind of see how everything came apart and went back together, but also to have that sort of camaraderie with staff and get to know everybody, really well. And he comes to us from Laughlin, Nevada, and he is not only, jumping right into the circulation aspect of his job, but he's also been very integral in helping set up the adult makerspace, and he's got a very strong technology background, so he's getting into our equipment module and all sorts of things that's been very beneficial to the library. And then the other thing I've highlighted is the Kennedy Children's Corner mural that we repainted in a new location in the library. We were really glad to be able to put that back, especially when it was only done a few years ago, and certainly complements the play place that the Carson City Chamber of Commerce leadership class provided for us, and so I think it's been very successful, and it plays really well in the new space with all the windows and being very open to the outside. So yeah, that's my report. Any questions?
You did a great job on that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kat.
You did a great job on that mural, and I really think it's more prominent now than it was before. So there's probably people who didn't even know it existed until it was moved. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And I got to meet Ermal at the grand reopening. He was a very nice guy. Moving on to 7B, the collection development update.
Amy Lauder, Collection Development Manager, for the record. One of the projects we worked on while we were closed kind of came up pretty quickly was this Story County Community Library Restart project with the cooperative, Nevada Library Cooperative, as we are now known. So this was something we were not going to be able to do until it came up again, and we did have extra staff hours because we were closed, and we can find other things to do, but we were able to make some time and provide some effort to the cooperative, along with some other staff people from the state library and Lyon County, especially, to kind of help restart the Story County Community Library, which, as some of you may know, the Story County Library kind of ceased to exist several years ago. So a lot of their patrons are also our patrons. So it was a nice opportunity to kind of they still had all their books. So, but basically what we did is we took, here's this picture of many, 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 many boxes. This is the basement hallway of the state library, which provided us workspace. 120 boxes. Most of them were books that had previously been in the circulating library, but were no longer in the catalog. So our main task was to sort those out, evaluate their condition and usefulness for the collection, and then add the ones that were appropriate to continue to circulate, adding them back into the catalog. So this was a great chance for a lot of people who don't usually get to do that kind of selection and cataloging work to learn how that works and how to do it, while also providing a service and for demonstrated need. So that was about 75 of the boxes were those materials, and then they also had 55 boxes of unprocessed materials that had been donated from various sources that we also sorted out for them, so they could kind of get a head start on choosing items and adding newer items to their collection. So once we were done, they now have a small library of 2,000 items ready to go. About 1,500, about 3/4 of that was done during those 2.5 weeks. So everybody that participated in that project now has a certificate for participating and doing that work and getting that training. And that library will now have something to start off with once they're able to open their building in the next month or two. So that was really nice to be able to do. And then back at the ranch, when we finally got our building back and we moved everything back in, and as you know, since we talked about it a few months ago, we moved everything. So this is an opportunity to kind of reevaluate where things are, what things go together, how things are accessed, and kind of make a few tweaks and changes to make things a little bit more open and easier to use. One of my favorite little corners now is we've kind of opened up the Nevada section, so it's much more visible and kind of showcases that collection rather than kind of being tucked in a corner, so that's really nice. And along with moving things, we also have the opportunity, we have new signs. You'll notice we now have our bilingual signs. That kind of creates a welcoming atmosphere, and it creates another point of access for a lot of people. And also in the kids section, one of my goals that I'm finally getting to is creating new shelf labels to make some of those nonfiction collections especially much more easy to browse and use for the kids and parents, because they can be kind of obscure when you have a bunch of skinny books with little white labels. You can't really see what's what. So this kind of, I have, you'll see them as, I have a few of them in the picture, but a little plastic piece that you can put a colored label and insert that says, this is what this number is, this is what it means, this is what you'll find here, here's some pictures. So that makes it much more visual and easy to use. So yeah, it's been nice to kind of accomplish some of those goals and make it look nice and easier to use, and I'm pretty happy with it. Does anybody have any questions about any of those things? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. And moving on to our grants admin report.
Yes, Diane Baker for the record, and I wanted to just highlight the what Sina had been talking about, our Makerspace, our Make It at 2 grant. Natalie had started that grant and had written the basics, and that's what we've been building on. We've been able to use the information that she had started, and then Sina and I have been able to really get to the specifics and be able to identify and purchase a number of those items, which we were able to showcase with our grand opening last Friday. Still things to get in place on that, but we're really pleased with what we have. We have brought back, been able to bring back our part-time person that we had with the mobile makerspace, Travis, and he is going to be helping coordinate here. He's also, with the skills that he has gotten through one of the programs at WNC, will be leading one of the sections with the soldering. And he's putting together now the certification and safety aspects for anyone who's going to take a soldering class, what needs to be achieved before an individual would be certified to be able to use that. And then he'll be doing other coordination. And we have our first maker in residence, that's Patchwork Giraffe, the staff there that will be doing fabric arts and creation, and they also will have their own certification, things that you have to know before you can use the sewing machine, can use the embroidery machine, and the like. So we are underway with those certifications and getting that calendar and stuff ready for the community to come in and start using the fabulous things we've been able to get. And just on the library refresh I put on there, it's just, I know Sina has mentioned, but, and I think you all know, staff were just champs with this. We did not have a moving company. There are libraries in larger jurisdictions, when they do this, they hire people to pack up the books, to take the shelves out. And our staff they were the people that got in there, got it done, and had the organization, logistics. We did have months and months preparing for it, but the logistics and plans that were set up in collection development and access services made this happen. And we had so much wonderful support from the community and from the city, other city offices. So I just, can't say enough about how that worked out on that. And one last thing that's not on here that Sina did mention is the cycle and how things happened. Our final application was due yesterday for the Library Services and Technology Act to the State Library. And so that was submitted. Jeremy came in and signed that for us on Tuesday. That now goes to the review at the State Library and will be forwarded to the State Council on Libraries and Literacy. The meeting is supposed to be in April. I have not seen the date for that council meeting at that point. And then the federal government does have a budget, so that means there's money for the program, so that's good. Do you have any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane. Moving on to item 8, board member announcements and requests for information. Did any board members have any further business that they wanted to get out? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 9, public comment. If anybody would like to address the library board, now would be the time. Seeing none forthcoming, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
I move we adjourn.
We are adjourned.
Thank you.